Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Taneum, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Hello, good morning.
I'm so excited to be talking with you today for a variety of reasons, but I'm so interested to hear what you think about the world of work since you've been at it for a while now, and to get at your experiences and your impressions and what you think we need in order to have healthy work environments. But before we get to that, I'd like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be able to talk to you about everything. And yeah, the first job I ever had as a young person, I got a job right away as soon as I could when I turned 16. And I worked at my local YMCA at the front desk. So, the Y, of course, is a gym, but they have tons of social programming and really community-driven programming, and that really appealed to me. And the way that my family had reinforced and taught me that community service was really important. And so working at the Y felt like a really natural fit. I was involved in some of their programs as a teenager, so then I got to be in this cool sort of I'm staff, but I'm also a programs person. And then they put me as a youth representative on their board of managers, and I got to see that whole side. So it was a really great experience, and I'm still involved with the Y to this day.
Oh, that's fantastic. I can just imagine and know how that feels when you're involved in something as a young person, and then you just get a little bit older and all of a sudden you're on staff, right?
Mhm.
So what was that like, that transition of this is not just something that you're volunteering at or participating in, there are rules to follow, times, management. What was the management and just your colleagues like in that first job?
Yeah, I've sort of always had the experience where I think people tend to think that I'm a lot older than I am. And that has been a consistent part of my working life, I would say, from the beginning. So, yes, I was 16, but I sort of enjoyed putting on this professional, like I was the first face that people saw when they came into the Y. And I'm sure I looked 16, but here I am ready to go. And yes, I'll scan your card and here's what's going on. And I loved being helpful and having the answer or figuring out. And from there, I started front desk and they moved me more so to registration and membership. And I really enjoyed that progression. And it was fun having a team of people who it felt like I would go to work and just hang out. And of course, did not get along with everyone. There were favorites and lesser favorites. But I loved going to work and feeling like I was part of a team. And feeling like it was a very clear environment to figure out, it was clear when a parent came in that they wanted to register for swim lessons and had missed the deadline or needed a scholarship or financial assistance, and to be able to work with them through that always felt really satisfying to me.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, of course, you don't get along with everyone, or they're not all your favorites. And, when we think about those first jobs, it's very similar to high school in the sense that, who's going to be in this class? Who's going to be in my English class? Who's going to be in my history class? And you look around and you're like, oh, shoot, or oh, awesome, right?
Mhm.
And whether it's you don't like it or you are happy, you just figure out what to do, right? And so, work as a young person, it seems to be a fairly natural progression of the same kinds of people we've had in class. I think as we get a little bit older, we maybe don't have that same expectation because we
Mhm.
do expect a sort of level of professionalism. And so
Mhm.
it's still the same, though. There are people that resonate with us and don't resonate with us. But it is, oh, I'm thinking about that, maybe a little bit harder to take because we're not as expecting it as much as maybe our younger selves.
I agree. And I still work with teenagers outside of work. I volunteer with a teen program. And I would say there are more similarities than not between how teenagers are struggling through a situation or progressing and growing through situations and how adults are too. We just don't tend to think of ourselves as in that active phase of growth. But I believe that growth is a very consistent companion. And if we invited ourselves to think about how to embrace that younger frame of mind, that we are growing all the time, I think that would be a very positive thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that that's really true. There's something that we fool ourselves. We're adults. And so what does that mean? We're adults, so we ought to. But, actually, the older you get, the more you get acquainted, or the more opportunity there is to experience real hardship and being mistreated, right? The longer you're alive, the more mistreated you can be and the more loved and accepted, right? So we collect these experiences, which then shape how we go into the next place. And
Mhm.
so while we expect maybe these adults to act in this whatever it means to be professional or grown up, right? We have this largely unstated but expectation of how people will show up when they are in public.
Mhm.
And yet, what has happened to them, for good or for ill, impacts how they're thinking about and what they think is appropriate. And so the dynamics, maybe even the older we get, maybe the more complicated.
Yeah.
Also, because there's this thing that I'm grown, but we're all growing, right? That's
Yes.
progression. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, working with young people, such an important part of it is modeling the behavior you want to see, or sort of mirroring to them how to respond in situations, or how to get through something, respond with kindness to the people around. You have to show them, because they'll see straight through if you're saying one thing and doing something else. And so I think that's also very true of the workplace. Management, leadership is modeling the way that you want to be. And it's very similar. I think my professional work with adults, for the most part, benefits from having worked with young people for a really long time.
That makes so much sense. And, you know, I love when leaders espouse a particular kind of leadership philosophy, right? And they say the right things. But of course, what we all prefer, we had to choose, is what are their actions? And it is the case that actions speak louder than words. It is nice to have those words and to have that philosophy and then seeing it followed out. But a lot of times people will be convinced that this is what they ought to be doing and this is what they really believe their leadership style is. And then you ask the people under them and they're like, well, no. Maybe
Right.
that's their ideal. And we could be generous. We're all people on the way. But that's not actually. I've had some bosses who thought of themselves one way and it's just
Mhm.
mayhem underneath and they're driving everybody crazy and they don't see it because they have this vision of themselves, which is a wonderful vision, but we need that vision, reality, and self-reflection to match up.
Yes, but I think what you said, we're all people along the way, that is so important, because at any point, the person who has that gap between their values or beliefs and their actions, at any point, they have an opportunity to narrow that gap.
Mhm.
And so when that's happening and you're working for someone who's saying one thing and acting another way, it puts the burden weirdly on you as an employee to then manage up and say, hey, here's what's happening, or go above and try and work back down. And that's really awkward with power dynamics, but it's also really important if you're in a safe situation to be able to do that, because that person needs to learn just as much as anyone else does.
Mhm.
And so having the opportunity to whether it's somebody who is supervising you or a direct report, and having those opportunities to have honest conversations of like, hey, I hear you say that this is something you really believe. You really believe in taking time off. So why am I getting that 3 a.m. email from you? Is that what you expect for me to do? Right. And so having those little check-ins is an opportunity for all of us as people to bring our values closer and more integrated with our actions and how we're showing up.
Absolutely. I do get a lot of people. when I do training, it's one thing how to have a conversation with someone who's a peer, or and that can be very difficult. And then, of course, someone that you are managing, it can also be very difficult. But it's so different when the power is above you. How do I say this? And someone said, "Yeah, right, Mary. This is my boss. That can fire me." Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that art of knowing how to speak, when to speak, what to say, what not to say. But the wonderful thing about even thinking about managing up is that the burden wonderfully is on me because that's empowering. If
Mhm.
I am in a position where, well, I can't do anything about it, they say they're a servant leader or they say they value time off, but they're emailing me this and at this time, and
Mhm.
this is the expectation. Um, oh, well, what am I supposed to do? But if I feel like, well, I can look at the lay of the land and develop my relationships and then ask these sorts of questions with real genuine curiosity instead of I'm going to tell you, you say one thing, do another. There's so many different ways to really see what's going on. And the more we do that, the more we can say, oh, this is not a place for me, or oh, I am helping this person develop. Because as you said, we're all people. And power is so um, transitory. One
Mhm.
person's the boss, the next time they're unemployed, the company folds, they might be working for you. You are the low person on the totem pole, and all of a sudden you're now the senior person at the organization. It's very transitory. Um, it's important. It is really there. But sometimes if we take a step back, then we can see um, the step back, I think, is that empowering and thinking about
Mhm.
what we can do.
Yes, I had a really positive experience working with a coach recently who was always inviting me to step into my power as
Mhm.
an employee and knowing what I brought to the team and offered. And that was really empowering to me in a situation where I felt like what I thought may not be listened to, or I had a very different viewpoint that I wanted to bring to the table. And this coach, who was amazing, and I'm really thankful for the chance to work with her. And I'd like to later, as we go along, talk a little bit about the importance of mentorship
Mhm.
and that those types of relationships. But she just said, step into your power, know what it is that you know, and recognize the power that you hold, even if it isn't that traditional positional power. And that really changed a lot of how I thought about showing up on a team and in a hierarchy as well. I've worked primarily in the nonprofit field and I'm still very early on in my career, but understanding the hierarchy and power dynamics has been a huge work in progress for me. I remember when I started at my first full-time job, and I was going along, going along, going along, and then a few years later, sort of look around and I think I had no idea I was going to be having to manage my supervisor or my these people above me as much as I am. Aren't they supposed to be the ones telling me what to do? Or aren't they supposed to be the ones keeping me on track and giving me assignments? Oh no, they want me to come up with what I'm doing and then they, have all these other things figured out too. And I'm actually on the front line of the organization interacting with people and seeing different things compared to where they're sitting and what they're seeing. And it's my responsibility to bring those things. And I just remember at a certain point thinking to myself, oh, I didn't know this was going to be part of it, and that has been a really transformational idea to just embrace and to know that you are always going to be managing up, down, sideways, diagonally, every direction, and you have to do a lot to manage yourself too.
Yeah.
And that was something that I was not told, and I learned the hard way. And I'm very grateful to have those experiences now to help guide me forward.
And that's really important to think about power dynamics. So we all have our relationship to power, how we think about it, how what kind of leadership structure we prefer. And that's wonderful to know. It's important to know what your preferences are. And then there's the reality of wherever you are.
Hmm.
And I do think that power dynamics and structures within a work environment, it's a game, not a game
Hmm.
like Monopoly or trivial or nefarious, but it's a structure. And
Hmm.
insofar as you want to do good work in the structure you're in, you have to understand how the structure works. And there may not be anything bad about it. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be just neutral. But to really understand, instead of what you imagine or what has been in a different place, especially if you're just coming out of school. School has this consistent kind of structure with the professor or the teacher and then the pupil, right? And they have hold the dynamic, the powers of the grades, the scholarships, all that kind of stuff. And then becomes very different in a place where you work. And so it's so important to really give thought to not just what is written as what the power structure is, but what actually it is and how it changes, and then
Yes.
to see what next, right? I think that's really smart.
It is. And unfortunately, I think I have seen, and many of us have seen, that the answer or the environment of those power dynamics change
Hmm.
based on who you are, and sometimes in ways that are unfair. I have personally seen and experienced different treatment in my career compared to colleagues who I would say are just as, if not more capable, but due to a variety of factors. Oftentimes, the way I've seen it shown up the most is when there's neurodivergence and an employee has a different set of needs than what is, neurotypical, and they struggle within the confines of the workplace because they're not receiving the support that they need to thrive. And unfortunately, everywhere I've ever been, I've seen something like this play out, whether it's neurodivergence or something else that's in the mix, which creates a different set of power dynamics for something that on the surface, okay, let's say we're both managers, or let's say we're both coordinators, on paper very similar, but in the day-to-day realities of how the culture of the team and the work is playing out, you have very different outcomes.
Such an excellent point because a power structure isn't just something that is set, it's always between people, right?
Mhm.
And so, right, so if I'm reporting to my boss and we've got like three or four coordinators or directors or whoever they are underneath the boss, um, how the boss interacts with each one, and therefore the power that is there or not there has to do with who I am, who they are at that particular time, our history with one another, their history with working with someone, quote unquote, like me, my history of working with someone who, quote unquote, is like them, and then just where we are in our particular stage of development. And so my experience at work could be very different than yours. And it really is very different. Neither one of us are right or wrong. It is different. And I think that's so smart to point out. It's not what is the power dynamic here, it's what is your relationship to the people who work here,
Hmm.
right? And then
Absolutely.
once you understand that, the wonderful thing about that is fluid. It can change depending on you.
Hmm.
You don't have to wait for them to change. It's okay. This person doesn't like working with someone who's younger or older or women or men or neurodivergent or whatever category. Okay, so I know that. What am I going to do differently? Right? How am I going to get what it is I need to get to do my job and fulfill the mission of the organization?
Absolutely. Yep. And it happens, I'd say, in every workplace that those are at play. And
Yeah.
thinking about how you can be a excellent colleague and supporter when you see that happening, so that you don't just let it play out that someone's being negatively impacted by whatever it may be. I think it's everyone's responsibility to support each other through those times.
Yeah.
And not get in the middle of anything or make it messy or think, oh, I'm going to swoop in and save the day. Or, I'm the only person who can turn this around for this other person that you don't even know completely what's going on. You just are guessing. But to genuinely have those relationships with your colleagues and with the people who you're interacting with, so that when tough things come up, you are ready to be that earnest supporter.
Yes, you are singing my song. I absolutely agree. The time to prepare for conflict is when there's no conflict. In the everyday, you're just doing your job. Everyone's doing their work. I mean, you don't know if it's going to be tomorrow, in a month, in 2 years, but it's going to happen. Something
You
is
could get
going to
that
go wrong
email anytime.
at any time because people are constantly shifting, markets shift. There's just so many different variables. It's going to happen. We're going to have conflicts. We're going to have disagreements. People are going to get their feelings hurt, and these things just normally happen. So if we are in the business of building those, being a good colleague and building good collegial relationships, then when the thing happens, whatever it is, we're more able to bear it rather than having these fragile relationships that are very thin because the very thin can just really snap and fall to pieces. But if something is more stout because we have already this goodwill, then if you show up late 3 times in a row, but we already have this goodwill to one another, I'm more likely to say, hey, what's going on? But if
Mhm.
we don't have a good relationship, I'm more likely to spin a negative narrative. Oh, I know she doesn't care. She's on her way out. Right. So, depending on the bias that we're coming from or what we think is already there, we're going to interpret this new set of information based on this old set we already have. So, let's make that old set good, right? Stronger relationships.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, let's talk about mentorship, since you brought that up. And can you tell us about maybe if it was at the Y or a different place, the first time you've had a mentor, or
Mhm.
if that's now, and then also how you got into being coached?
Yes, absolutely. So, I was very fortunate from an early age to benefit from a relationship with a woman who just said, when I was young, somebody else took me out to lunch and said, and bought my lunch, and we had a good conversation. And she said at the end, now, when you're ready, you're going to take some young woman out to lunch and you're going to help her through whatever it is she's dealing with, and you're going to buy, and then you're going to set that in motion for her to do too. That pay it forward model. And I remember it was my advisor in a program I participated in as a teenager, and she was just so cool. When I was a high schooler, I was just like, "Oh, you are so cool." And then a few years later, I went to college, and she happened to work across the street from where I went to college. We went to lunch, and I'll just always remember it. And we are good friends to this day. And I'll just never remember that expectation she set with me right off the bat, that she was doing this because she cared and she expected me to care for people who came along after me. And it was deeply touching and it was deeply influential in how I showed up. And I've been lucky since then to benefit from, I mean, probably more people who I can count on my hands, who just have that generous spirit. I see you, I care, I want to help you. And it's not one-sided. It goes always, because when you have intergenerational relationships, everybody comes with a different orientation, a different perspective, different experiences, and it very much goes back and forth all sorts of ways, right? So, from the time I was 20 at least, it was just modeled for me that this is how we take care of each other. And I felt that that was a really profound gift
Mm.
at the time and now many years later. So that's one. To answer the second part of your question
Let me
about,
just jump in
oh,
on that. I
yeah.
absolutely love the articulation of that. It's one thing to mentor somebody, right? To take them out to lunch and to, find out about you and have that kind of relationship. But then for her to say, and now pay it forward. And because I'm thinking, I've never done that, but that's really an easy thing that if you are mentoring someone that you could insert because now you will do that the rest of your life. And
Mhm.
while a lot of us do care and want to help people who are interested in being helped or having those kinds of conversations, but to insert that is that
Mhm.
intentionality and to model that, that's really strong.
It is, and it's an invitation,
Hmm.
which I believe that invitation is so important in every part of our lives, and to invite ourselves and each other to live into our values, to invite a young person to think about what they can do now, what they can do later, and model it. I just, uh, I mean, shout out to Crystal because she's the best human.
Clearly. Good job, Crystal.
Yeah. So, if I may, the second part of your question was about how I came to be coached accidentally. When I started a new job, they had already been working with a consultant around measurement, learning, evaluation, impact. And so we picked up in that, and initially, our working relationship was focused on how do we measure outcomes? How does the theory of change work? And it just shifted through some circumstances where she sensed that I needed some additional support. And I think we both found ourselves in this coaching dynamic without realizing that we got there. And then we were there and sort of named it. And she has said that coaching was not part of her portfolio, but we had a really good conversation following the experience where she named how much she surprisingly enjoyed it and how valuable it felt. And for me, I'm thinking like, yeah, it was valuable because you helped me get through a really tough time that was destabilizing, that made me question, do I want to be here? How do I show up at work? How do I deal with these hard things? And you walked with me through it. And so I'm thinking, yeah, it was valuable. And to hear her tell me it was so valuable from my end to know that because that's such a core part of how we all work. And I think you share this philosophy, Mary, that we're all human people at work and it comes down to how we relate to each other. So when you have those opportunities to go along with someone through something really hard and come out the other side, whether it works out in a positive, quote unquote, positive way, or if it's a messier ending, um, whatever it may be, just that relationship that you can form between the coach and the person who's being coached. Again, it's not just that one-way flow. It's this beautiful little ecosystem that you've built as two people working together.
I love that so much. I mean, so you go through this difficult time, you sort of get this accidental coaching that helps you through.
Mhm.
What do you think? So this is a bit of a shout out for coaching. What do you think? Are a pretty resilient person, so I'm sure you would have found help in a different way. But if that had not come about, what do you think would have been the outcome, or
Mhm.
how do you reflect on that?
Yeah, I want to say that I feel very fortunate that in the situation, this person met me where I was at and was nimble enough to go into the mess and provide that service because it was a consultant who I was working with, and she shifted her service that she was providing. And not everybody has the capacity to do that or
Mhm.
the ability in other ways. And so I'm really, really lucky in that way. And I think that, as you said, had that not been the case, I have worked hard in my life to build that outside support network. Everything from friends who edit my email to, people who I can just say, hey, are you around? I need to call you, and just vent. And then they hear that venting and say, well, do you want what I really think? And I say, yes, because I do want what they really think. I don't want it to just go out there and sit out there and remain as venting. And I think it's really important for all of us to think about what are the things that I need and what are the things that I can give in return to the people in my universe.
Yeah.
And so I think it probably would have been harder because the person who I worked with had very focused, insightful, based on context suggestions that she could give me. I think who's to say what would have happened, but if we can build these universes of constellations of support, around ourselves inside and outside of work, I think that's the key to getting through any hard situation that arises.
I love that so much because, right, I think about these reciprocity, right? I'm very interested in reciprocal altruism, right? So reciprocal altruism is not you over me or me over you, it's you and I together, right? And so whether that's in our culture or our any of our relationships, right? So what is that sort of reciprocity? And sometimes I'm more of the giver and you're the receiver, and sometimes it's the other way around, and in different sorts of ways, right? But really thinking about, you know, the quality of our relationships, and the quality of our relationships takes some thought and consideration, right? So, what is this value that I'm adding to you? Well, what is it that you need, and what do I have to give, and what is my capacity, and vice versa. In this, I hope it doesn't sound usury because obviously that's not what we're talking about. It's usury in the best possible way, in the sense that we're here for each other, right?
Hmm.
Just to hang out and sometimes to celebrate and sometimes to mourn. That those bits of advice that do you want just me to say, yeah, you're right, or what I really think? Right. I
Hmm.
always say that to my husband. What do you want here?
Yep.
I'll tell you, do you really want to know what I think? Or that's just not the time, right?
Hmm.
But the more we're in those relationships, then like how do we develop resilience? Let me
Hmm.
float something by you. I came across this little video on TikTok and yeah, I've just been thinking about it. Um, and it was somebody who was saying that the way they think about work is that they're a consultant. So they have this full-time job, they work in this big organization, but they see themselves as a consultant. So they come in, they find out what it is they need to do, they be a good colleague, and they get their work done, but they see themselves as a consultant in the sense of, um, I think it's a very empowering way to think about it. Because when you work for a company, you're not in charge of whether or not they're going to eliminate your branch, right? Or the market's going to shrink, or a new manager is going to come in that just simply doesn't like you, right? And so to me, it just seems like this really, I guess empowering is my word right now,
Yeah.
but there's really like power play to not only a call for me to be the most professional I can be,
Hmm.
but for me to come in and say, okay, I don't need to wait for somebody else to tell me what to do. You've hired me because I've got this skill set, I've got these abilities. All right, what am I going to do here? How am I going to add value? And I might be here for 2 months, 2 years, 20 years. I
Hmm.
don't know. I'm
Hmm.
here until the job is done. But it's about me being professional, me being a good colleague, but not being a company man or woman.
Yeah.
Does that make, what
Yeah.
do you think about that?
Yeah. I like that it also invites us to be aware of our expertise. Um, when you think of yourself, when you put your consultant hat on, then you think to yourself, okay, I have something to offer here. And as you're saying, it invites you into professionalism, it invites you into honesty, I think, because you, uh, so let me back up and say, having worked in the nonprofit sector all my life, one of the challenges that I hear talked about a lot and I've experienced somewhat is, well, we'll bring in a consultant to do this thing instead of doing it in-house. And the consultant comes in, looks around, approaches the situation, and staff think, well, come on, I could have told you that, which is often the case. And it's no one, it's no knock on the consultants. It's like if you're coming to that conclusion that staff who have been there for a long time are also coming to, like, good on you. Um, but it creates this weird sort of resentful dynamic. And I think if if it works for you to put on that consultant hat as an employee and think, okay, actually, I can name these things that are going on below the surface. And at any time, we can embark on this work. Now, of course, you don't know if that suggestion is always going to be picked up or whatever it may be, but I do like the idea, whether it's a consultant hat, whether it's something else, to put yourself in the frame of mind to visualize something to be able to then show up in a way that's more closely aligned with how you want to show up.
Mhm. Yeah. Just been thinking a lot about how to think about work, right? I think the family is
Mhm.
not the way to think about it,
Mhm. Mhm.
for a variety of reasons.
Yes,
Um,
strong
right.
agree.
We can think of it as a community, which I think is a very strong way of thinking about it. But I think you're right. Pulling up that imagery, what is it that's going to help us be our best selves, to be really good colleagues, to do really great work, and also to be resilient so that we don't fall into the trap of, I have to wait on somebody else
Hmm.
in the wrong way, like this disempowered kind of this person's not doing what it is that I want, or I don't know how to really. But the consultant, I've seen a lot of people who are working on a project and they are very passionate about it, and then the organization goes in a different way, and they feel like and I understand this sense of disappointment or sometimes betrayal, but it's almost to me a little bit too much involvement in the sense of, well, this is an organization, right? And it isn't all about you, and you don't own this organization. So how do we put those systems in place in our own minds to be able to be agile? And it's fine to be disappointed, and um, but how do we then move on to the next thing because we're getting paid to do a certain kind of job?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think expectation setting is huge. As, like I said before, relatively early in my career, that has been something that has been really important for me to consciously work really hard to identify. Like you said before, mentioning, do we think of work as a family? Do we think of work as a community? Do we think of work as a place we show up and leave? And we sort of are hands off about, oh, I'm done and I'm going home. Doesn't matter anymore, right? And I think everybody being able to answer for themselves, here's what I want out of work, is really valuable and important, because then when you name what you want out of work and how you want to be, then that gives you an opportunity to live into it
Mhm.
and to see if what you expect and desire matches up with the people around you. Because if I want to go, so here's an example. I try really hard to take all my time off. I love taking time off. And as I've progressed through my career, that gets harder and harder, right? There are more responsibilities. It's a different relationship to what you're holding, the knowledge that you have that maybe isn't all the time on paper, or the certain things that you can check off. And I've sort of grown into this battle with myself of when I hear myself say, or when I type the message that says, well, I'll be out tomorrow, but if you really need something, you can text me. Now, on one hand, I think that actually is aligned with my values because I care about that person. And if they need help, I want them to have help, particularly if I'm in a situation on my day off where it's not going to be a big deal. There are some things that I probably would say I am not reachable. On the other hand, a part of me sort of like withers, like one of those little mermaid, little poor unfortunate souls, and it's just like, no, don't say that, and I think that both of those parts of me exist. And where I hope I'll come down most of the time is what's supportive to myself and the people around me. Sometimes I'm not available, and that is a fact. There are times in our lives where we are down for the count, whether we're out camping in the backcountry and we do not have service, so you can't reach me for real, or whether we've experienced a profound loss and you need to take that time to heal and you need to be away to nurture yourself and your community. And there are times when you can be there for your people and be flexible. And I think that whenever you're typing out that message that says, well, yeah, you can text me if you need something, um, I think you just have to look your expectations in the face,
Mhm.
and you have to have named them to be able to do that. And then to come to a decision that you can then stand behind.
Mhm.
Because if I say you can text me and I don't really mean it,
Mhm.
that turns into something else. Because then I'm resentful or I'm disappointed or I think that you've screwed up. But if I stand behind what I'm saying, then it's like, okay, yeah, that's what I said, and let's work through it, whatever thing comes up, right?
Yeah. I love that because the more we know ourselves and we ask those reflective questions and we understand it, and understanding yourself isn't a one-time thing, right? Like as you said, as you progress, we're in
Yes.
different stages of our life, different kinds of jobs have different kinds of demands. But then we can also take a step back and say, okay, this is what I want out of work and this is how I'm going to work. What about somebody else? Somebody else, like they love work. They work almost 24/7, and maybe that's not my jam, but that's what they're doing, right? And
Hmm.
that's what they love. And insofar as it's appropriate, like the person isn't being burned out, but that's just what they do. And then somebody else is like, I'm a 9 to 5er. When I'm here, you have got me. I am killing it, but that's it.
Hmm.
And I don't think one is good or bad. It's just what it is. But then I can not only do I have my expectation for myself, so I can vocalize to others. Or for some people, their most important relationships are at work. And for other people, they are fine to be good colleagues, but they're not interested in building friendships. They'll be, again, good colleagues, but all of their significant relationships and all their thought energy for all that kind of stuff is outside of work, and they don't really want to go for drinks and they don't want to go to a baseball game. Um, if it's a work in-house team building, fine, because that's being a good colleague. But the more we understand those expectations, then we find, in the Venn diagram of what's going on here,
Hmm.
then that really live and let live, helping, really encouraging people to be authentic and supporting each other so that we can do the good work, what that means. But yeah, these missed expectations, because sometimes we don't know what we want from ourselves, and then we just assume, well, this is what I'm doing, this is what everybody else should be doing, which is just not the case. People have wildly different expectations about work-life balance.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So, when you look at your career and you think about the different kinds of conflicts you've had, we all have conflict, it's very normal. Can you tell us about a conflict you had and um, what happened, and maybe reflecting on it, if you would do anything differently now or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the hardest things that I experienced at work was when I was a new supervisor. I was very young, I was supervising somebody, and I really hadn't encountered all that much in that particular dynamic. And we suggested my supervisor had suggested to me a role change or a shift in the work responsibilities. And we had this conversation amongst the three of us that went just so poorly. Uh, the person was upset, with rightfully so, and confused, and there was a massive loss of trust. And I just remember thinking, oh man, I have been part of the cause of this pain. And I don't know, maybe it sounds weird to think about pain at work, but I think it's very real,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
it's very personal.
Mhm.
And I just felt awful, and I just
Mhm.
never wanted it to happen again. And what had happened was it was a surprise. There was not a trail of breadcrumbs leading up to this change. As I mentioned, there was a massive loss in trust, which then we carried forward
Mhm.
into the rest of the relationship. But something that came out of that experience, which has been a really core belief as I supervise now and continue to have been in a supervisory role is that as a supervisor, you have to have the back of the person you're supervising. You are responsible for them. They're not some person over here, doing whatever, and every once in a while you check in. You're a team. And and to me, just that one phrase, I've got your back, they need to believe it and you need to believe it. And of course, there are limits of that. There are certain things that are then above you as a supervisor that you can't decide. But if you have built that relationship of trust, and if the person you're supervising knows that you will do your best to give them fair treatment, then that will get you through a lot.
Mhm.
And even if, let's say, you end up parting ways as colleagues, then you can still have that positive, no, that person did right by me.
Mhm.
And to me, that's what's really important at the core of my belief as a supervisor because of this really poor situation that happened to me early on.
Yeah.
Not, it didn't even, I mean, it did happen to me. I want to be clear. The majority of the upset was not mine. I mean, I
Yeah.
was very upset by the situation, but I was not the primary person impacted in an employment situation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think that's also important to point out that when there are conflicts or negative things that happen at work, and if it's happening between two people, if there's anybody else around, there is this blast radius. And we do also, I think we do a very poor job of taking care of the mental health of the people who've been impacted.
Mhm.
And when there's unmanaged conflict that's been going on, it just, I see it all the time. It is not about the person or people. I mean, it is. But actually, they're the only people that are empowered to do anything about it. Everybody else is told, don't look this way. This is not about you. And it's like, this has impacted me. This is toxic. That's why I really do like that idea of toxic work environment. Like for me, I think, no, that's exactly what happens. It's like this poison that gets diffused within the air. Now you do have these primary and secondary and tertiary, and so different people need different kinds of support.
Mhm.
Um, but insofar as we want healthy work environments, we do have to deal with these issues. And don't surprise people, And the breadcrumbs are important because talking about and noticing an issue as part of being a team, right? I notice you, I notice this issue, and let's work on it. And I do think that you can part ways in a way where the person hasn't been destroyed, right?
Mhm.
And a kind of trust is there. I think people who leave an organization should ideally leave because it's no longer a fit for them. They've been told the lay of the land very clearly, and they've been given the tools to come alongside, and they have decided not to do that. But these surprises,
Mhm.
um, of course, it doesn't always, I mean, there's a million caveats there, but
Yes.
ideally, this
Yeah.
is what we want to have so that we can have these, stable work environments that when things go wrong, and they will, we have these mechanisms for res restoration, dealing with it, and then how do we move forward to be stronger? Because when we do difficult things with each other, um, we're stronger
Yeah.
together.
When I work with my student leaders, I tell them, you will goof up. You will. It's going to happen. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe it's the situation. Doesn't matter. It's going to happen. And when it happens, you always have an opportunity to address it afterward. If you don't like the way that something went down, it's not all said and done. You always have that opportunity. It's that empowerment again.
Yeah.
You have that ability to bring something back and heal it. And what you just said about restoration is really
Mhm.
important because the situation I described earlier, we did not ever go through a healing process to recover from what had happened. And that just continued to fester. And so,
Yeah.
not thinking that anything is ever like all tied up and done, it's behind us. If there's that feeling of something is unsettled, if there's that lingering toxicity to a situation, it usually grows. You can always come back to it.
Yeah. I mean, it. It's just so interesting to me that in general, we're all people, but we don't understand how people work. And we think, oh, we're just at work, so people should just be professional and get over it. Like, well, you're dealing with a bunch of people, and once trust is broken, and you think, oh, well, the situation's past, let's just move on and plan stuff together and trust each other and and collaborate with one another and brainstorm and look to the future and be creative. I, do you know? I mean, it's like, do you know how people work, right? How do we move forward? It's if you just tell people to suck it up, I mean, you can tell them that and they can suck it up, but you don't have them anymore. You don't
Mm-mm.
have their energy. You don't have their, oh, connecting this person to that person. This is how you get quiet quitting. This is how you get, people who feel who we who are more harmed than helped. And I talk about pain at work all the time because this is what happens, real sustained harm. And then that goes into their families and that goes into the community. And what we want is the opposite. We want to leave people, no matter where we are, if we're at a restaurant, if we're at a community event, if we're at work, we want to leave them better than the way that we found them, like,
Mhm.
always. And so hard things happen at work. People part ways at work. All these things happen, but if we build resilience, we ought to be able, there's an ethical way to do it, a way that is always a respecter of persons, but we have to value that. Or persons first and employees some way down the line.
Yeah.
So I know we are running late on time here. I just so enjoy talking with you. So I've got two questions left for you, well, one is I just want to know, can you tell us about the work you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work right now still at a nonprofit. We focus on rural inclusivity and we host primarily virtual programs that feature rural communities around the US doing really innovative, inspiring work. And our hope is that through encountering these ideas and these stories, that we inspire other people who may be out there in their community feeling lonely to know that it's happening, or to experience a different story about what's going on in rural. And I love it because to me, again, it's very closely related to what you're saying. When you have one experience, it's not an isolated experience. It ripples out into all these other areas. Your experience at work relates to your experience at home, relates to then how you show up as a community member. And I think that that to me is a big part of our work. How we feel most of the time in our living situation, in our community, impacts us so deeply. And one of the things that I love most that we're able to do is that we have a weekly morning call for rural women where there's no agenda and we all talk up or show up and talk about what is on their mind. And I love it because oftentimes people will say, well, I don't know if I should bring this up, but, and I always say, yeah, you should bring it up because if it's on your mind and heart and you're thinking about it nonstop, you should absolutely talk about it with other people, especially with other people who are coming from a similar context and can have something to offer you to work through a problem or feel that you're not alone or whatever it may be, feel stronger. So that's what I'm doing now. I've always had a passion for programming and implementing solutions, problem solving, building relationships with people. And I've been very fortunate in my career to be able to get to know people all across the US in a million different circumstances. And I have loved meeting every single person.
I really appreciate your work so much because, we talk about today this loneliness epidemic, in this world of hyper-connectedness. And I have a million friends on Facebook or whatever it might be. People are more and more isolated and alone. But that's why I love story. Story is such a way to not only understand difference. Oh, this is a different way to be around away in the world, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not as scary. Maybe I can open up, but then also, I'm experiencing this and I feel alone, but I see other people experiencing it. And connectedness, the more we are connected and the more we feel understood, or we hear somebody else putting into words my experience, the more I understand myself. anything that helps us be connected in the world of work, it'll help us do better work. There are studies that, while I don't think that we're at work to find our best friends, but they say if you have work buddies,
Mhm.
you will have a better work experience. You will
Mhm.
do better work. Your job satisfaction, your engagement, if you have people you resonate with. I don't think you have to resonate with everyone to do good work, but this makes so much sense to me. It's common sense. But anything we can do to strengthen these bonds, and as you said, about I love this constellation, right? This constellation idea of resiliency and relationships. Um, and this is a wonderful use of technology is finding those communities where you're not just watching like social media, but you're participating because the good life is the active life, actual relationships.
And the majority of the hundreds, maybe even thousands of people I've met in my career have been through a screen. I have worked remotely these past few years, worked remotely through the pandemic and built really close relationships with people thousands of miles away to the point where I have gone now and visited them in their homes and stayed with them, having never met, and it's because no matter the format, if you want to connect with somebody, you can find a way. And I love it. I feel very, very grateful for the people who I've gotten to interact with through work because, as you're saying, it gives me this sense of joy that in turn really increases my satisfaction and engagement.
Yeah. So, my final question, as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that they'll be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
I think it's something I've been talking about a lot today, which is encouraging every single person to have space to identify their values,
Mm,
to explore, and to then know themselves better so that they can be in community better.
mm,
The mentor who I mentioned before, Crystal, a few years ago, I was just struggling with what the heck was I doing and why was I doing it and where was I going to go and how was I going to be? And she just said, honey, you need to do some value work.
mm,
You need to explore. She told me about her process that she had gone through to identify a set of her personal values. And now you'll remember I was raised in the YMCA. And they have four core values, which I still love to this day: caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility. And I had been familiar with that framework. And so I embarked on a process that I still consider active and open of exploring my own values. And anytime something comes up, then it gives me this opportunity to think about my personal integrity.
mm,
The personal self and the professional self are the same self. And yes, it's a different
mhm,
context, but
mhm.
it's still you.
Yeah.
And so thinking about my own values, things like balance and compassion and intentionality and interconnectedness, that is something that I try and bring with me everywhere. And that was something I had to do on my own, of course, with the support of these people and this network that I had built. But if every employee had that chance and that space, no matter what your job is, you could be just that front desk staff. You could be back of house staff at a restaurant. If you have that opportunity to explore who you are and to bring that with you into work in a really positive way, I think that our work lives would be a million times dreamier.
I love that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. That space and self-reflection and and that's empowerment, right? If I know who I am and what I value, then I can stand up for myself. I can add this kind of value, as you said, speaking up in the meeting, right? It's much easier to speak up if you've done all that internal work and you know who you are. So. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like I could just keep on talking to you for a long time, but I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mary. And I will say, I was nervous, but I was excited to get to have this conversation, and I really enjoyed myself. So thank you for doing the work that you do.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Well, take care.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Tina, for being on Conflict Managed. I could have really talked to you for another hour. I had other questions I want to ask you, but thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. It would be fantastic if you would like and subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you haven't had a chance to check out my latest book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do, and starts a conversation about what to do instead. And I am really excited that I have finished the rough draft of my newest book, which is about generation wars or opportunities at work. So more to come on that when that comes out. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Till next time, take care.